So I want to introduce you to two people who are friends and whose friendship has just kind of made the news recently. Darryl there, with his dog Max, has lived in a homeless context, and I say that because there's no one description of that, for maybe 7, 8, 9 years. Struggled with a huge number of tough realities that have made life very difficult for him. And his friend Leslie Baldwin. I knew Leslie 20 years ago when, in another life, I did her mother's funeral. But they're friends, even though that her world is the world of finance and standard life where she works, and family and all that kind of thing, grandchildren, as you can see, which seems a long way from Darryl's world. But actually, their friendship is really quite inspirational. And we know about it because of an incident that happened recently that showed the depth of their friendship. So Darryl was beaten up on the streets. If you are on the streets, you are 13 times more likely to experience violence. And so he was beaten up and stabbed, as was his dog, Max. Now, Leslie got to hear about it because she spent time getting to know Darryl as he was sitting outside her place of work. She took time to talk to him, to understand him, and the relationship had grown. So when she heard about this, about her friend suffering in this way, she did something about it. She had a crowdfunding appeal for him, and it was quite extraordinary. Within a week, they raised £17,500 for Darryl to really try and make a difference in his time of crisis. And in fact, another letting agency came and offered Darryl the house too. And so he was able to move into a flat. And when Leslie was asked about the incident by the local paper, this is what she said. I'm friends with a homeless man, Darryl, and his dog, Max. Become victims of some thugs recently who've beaten up Darryl and stabbed little Max. Thankfully, Max is okay and make a full recovery. I am friends with a homeless man. She stood beside her friend in his time of need, even though many of others may have chosen to have some kind of distance. Now, the journey that they're going to take now that the money's been raised and the house is there is still a crunchy one. This isn't a Hollywood film. There's still big challenges to happen. And Cyrenians, whom I work with, are part of that journey now, and we're supporting them both as we explore where we can go next to with this opportunity. But the opportunity has been created because of the relationship that was there. A relationship that meant that hope and transformation in a tough time could possibly happen. We believe in Cyrenians that the journey from exclusion to inclusion is an inner journey, a journey of a soul, but it is a journey built on relationships, for that is what most feeds the soul. So we redistribute surplus supermarket food. We feed 4,500 people in partnership with 100 organisations every week, shifting 30 tonnes of food that would otherwise go to landfill. We distribute it using a variety of ways, including vans. And I went out in the van one day with a guy called Arthur. Now, Arthur has also had a tough life. He's an addict for 20-odd years of alcohol. Really a tough life in so many ways, and things were really not good for him. He managed to end up at our place, and he's been sober now for 4 years. And he told me that he had kept his tenancy for 4 years. That's the longest he'd kept a tenancy in his life, and he's in his 40s or 50s now. And he's back talking to his daughter too. Extraordinary change and relationships being built. But he told me the reason that that was able to happen was because by driving the van and taking the food to other places where folk were in need, he had moved from being someone who was helped to someone who had become a helper. In a new form of relationships, he was able to see himself dramatically differently and build hope and transformation where it didn't seem possible. Many years ago, I took a group of young people to Iona. It's a little island off the west coast of Scotland. It is seen as the cradle of Christianity in Scotland. This isn't a story about religion itself, but it is about the community that is there. So we took the folk there for a week, the young folk for a week, and they were coming for Leith. So you know, apart from maybe going down the Portaleith occasionally, you know, seaside and islands and stuff, weren't things what they'd done much of. So at the end of the week, I said, have you had a good time? And they said, oh, it was great, it was great. I said, what was good about it? And one of the young women, Michelle, said to me, she said, see here, you can wear cheap training shoes and people still like you. It was a profound self-discovery in new relationships that mattered so much to her that I'm still in touch with Michelle 20-odd years later. And she still remembers the difference that made to her and her ability to achieve and flourish in the things that she wanted to do. An extraordinary change in new relationships about who she was as a person. Now, I didn't know that was going to happen when I took that group there. You couldn't kind of plan for the cheap training shoes bit. We just had to go on a journey and create a space where something different could happen, and a new possibility was discovered. So the woman at the end there is a friend of mine, Sheena Withman. She's a lecturer or was a lecturer across in Glasgow. Now, Sheena heard that one of her local schools, Springburn Academy, was having real challenges. The journey of the young folk. They had nobody going on to higher education at all, and very few going on to further education. But they had no money. Real challenge. What did they do? So they created a mentoring scheme, and Sheena became one of the mentors. And she told me that what she did was spend an hour a week with a young woman as she went through from fourth year into fifth year, and the possibility of doing exams that might get her on further on. She said, I didn't do very much, I just listened. She said, but she told me a story where the young woman was about to go into exam, so Sheena went with her and said, well, we'll be all right, you know, it'll be great. And she said to her, you know, you'll be fine at this. You're clever. And the young lass burst into tears. She said, oh, she's got an exam, what have I done, what have I done? The woman said, no, it's okay, it's just nobody's ever told me that before. She passed her exam, she's at university. In that relationship and that comment and that expression of affirmation and love, enormous possibilities became real. So some of you recognize one of the people in that picture. So we do cooking classes. We do cooking classes because if you can give somebody a house, that's fine, but if they can't cook for themselves, they're not going to keep the house. And of course, we find that the best bit of the cooking classes is the meal at the end, sharing the meal. So one guy came and started the classes. Now, he had done some terrible things in his life, things you really don't want to know about. And he knew when he came out, having spent an awful long time in prison, that people would see him through the paradigm of his past. And he believed that he would never get to anywhere else because of that stigma that he carried because of his own actions. So he was doing the cooking classes, and he liked them so much that he did them again. And they did them again. And at the end of them, if you'd taken a photograph of the guy at the end of them and the beginning, you'd have thought they were two completely different human beings because his whole persona was changed by cooking classes. We asked him, why, what happened there? What was good about this? He said that when we had the meal at the end, which was great, and I could sit with people and eat, they would eat food that I had made. Food that I had made, they took on their plates, they received and ate it. That was the point of change in the simplest of human acts, in a relationship built around food shared. We know that many of the people we travel with in Cyrenians carry what are called adverse childhood experiences, a combination of abuse and neglect and household dysfunction. And there's a lot of evidence that says that if you have 4 or more of these, you will end up with significant physical or mental health challenges or behavior patterns that are inherently destructive, and you end up in tough realities. There's a lot of work being done to evidence the connection between those things. But interestingly, there are some people who have those 4+ ACEs, as they're called, and they get through. And a university in Wales did a study recently about why that was the case. What was the difference there? And sure, there was lots of stuff about services around and access to money and all those kinds of things, maybe education and opportunities and stuff, and all that's important. But actually, the common factor was this. It was an always available adult. Somebody they could identify with who would journey with them no matter what else was happening in the chaos in their life. And it could be a granny or an auntie or somebody's big brother or a sports coach or a teacher or whatever. It's just somebody who would just be there. Not apply a plan or tell them they had to do this or that or anything else. Just be there, always available. And that was the thing that could take them through that place of chaos and destruction of themselves. Hi Burns, Chief Medical Officer of Scotland until recently, has done some extraordinary work on why Scotland is one of the sickest nations in Europe. I mean, some parts of Glasgow have a life expectancy amongst men of lower than the Gaza Strip. We have horrendous issues with obesity, with violence, with alcoholism. It's not just because of the deep-fried Mars bar diet. There is something profound going on in Scotland. Now, Harry understands that a lot of it is to do with the stress and insecurity. But what he says is the solutions lie in building up families. That most profound of relationship, in whatever form that family takes, whatever shape the 21st century family is, that is the place where real change will happen. That is the place that will make the difference. The British cohort study has tracked everybody born in Britain between the 5th and 12th of April 1970. It feels to me a bit like kind of legal stalking, but there you go. They've done some profound work in just seeing the journey those folk have taken. So when they were 34, the folk in that study were asked, do they feel successful? It's a deliberately feeling question and self-defining success. So do you feel successful? And of those who said they felt successful, the common factor was not the structure of the family that they came from or that they were in, the marital status, siblings, wealth, education, job, status, any of those things that might appear to be the definitions of success in today's world. The single common factor amongst those aged 34 who felt successful was the level of self-confidence aged 10. Their inner well-being was the key factor on the journey. Now, we know that our inner well-being is not something that's just ourselves, but relates to our capacity to be in relationship with others. John McMurray, Professor of Moral Philosophy in Edinburgh in the 1950s, had a definition of our person and our person identity in three parts. There's our individuality, who we are, the people they define as different from others. But he said that's not really who we are, nor is the person we are in all the social engagement you have, the people you meet, colleagues at work and folk at the bus stop or wherever it is. Our person is found in our relationships with others. Relationships where we are vulnerable and we journey in crisis and we laugh and have tears and have opportunities and celebrations. All the deeply human feelings of things that fill the soul. And our capacity to be who we might be lies in our capacity to have those relationships. For we are fundamentally connected as beings. Human life is inherently a common life. But he wasn't the first to say that. Francis Hutcheson, who was also Professor of Moral Philosophy in Glasgow in the 18th century, a huge influence on the Scottish Enlightenment, said this. Well, I'm not going to read you to this because this is 18th century English grammar, and it's kind of doesn't make a lot of sense until you have to think about it. What he really was saying was, when we're thinking about the decisions we take in all of life, the key factor is doing the thing that will bring the greatest happiness to the greatest number. So our moral frame as human beings is a connected frame, a relationship-based frame. And he went on to influence people like David Hume and Adam Smith, who talked much more about not just the act that brings happiness to others, but the sense that we get from seeing the happiness in others as a consequence of our actions, our decisions, our choices. Our sense of self lying in our connectedness with others. But even they weren't the first to say that. Way back throughout all of the ways we've created our belief systems, whether it's religion or philosophy, whatever it is, we see that golden rule. Love one another. Love the stranger. Love your enemy. Do the right thing. Do unto others as you have them do to you. The golden rule of humanity is a connected rule, a relationship rule. It's a relationship about others as well as self. And in that relationship, we find out who it is we actually are. But what we know, for those who are in tough realities, for whom making those relationships is difficult because of what's happened to them, that takes time. When I first left school, I worked as a youth worker in Ruckhill in Glasgow. Now, it's a kind of tough place. They used to say that even the Alsatians used to run a bit in threes, you know. It was that kind of place, you know. So we guy that we worked with for a while, and he had a horrendous life. Burned early as a child, really had a tough life. Worked for about 6 months, and we got him a house. And I thought, sorted. 3 weeks later was my door. He had, as they used to say in those days, when you used to put money in the meter yourself rather than cards, but he'd screwed his own meter. You know, he'd stolen from himself, got kicked out of the house. And I said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And the social worker we'd been working with said, look, he said, it's taken him 21 years to get into this situation. It might take him 21 years to get out of it. And we just have to be there. And that's what we understand in Cyrenians, that the journey takes time, and we need to be able to respond and be ready when the changes happen, even though they might be really small changes. I'll give you some examples. So we have a young woman, Kerry, who is a peer worker. She herself is in recovery, and she works and journeys with folk who are in the same situation. And she was journeying with this guy who was so isolated as a consequence of his addiction that he just didn't leave the house. And he never drew the curtains. He was just completely on his own. She kept going and kept going and kept going. And because she knew what it was like to be where he was, she was able to build a relationship that others perhaps had not been in a position to do. It's also just who she is. Anyway, one day, she turned up at the house. And before she went in the door, she knew that change had happened. He'd opened the curtains. He'd put light on his life in a way he hadn't done for years. And because she'd been in a journey with him and understood him, she knew the significance of that act and was able to help him celebrate it and go to the next stage and the next stage. It's a tiny, tiny act, but an extraordinarily profound change for him. We have a befriending service with older people because older people are actually significantly more likely to lose their houses these days because they become socially isolated. We went with a guy called Ken who lost his wife a number of years ago and really, again, had struggled to get out and to do things. And during the course of conversation with his befriender, who said to him, so what would you like to do? What would you like to do? What could we do? And he said, you know, it's a long time since I put up Christmas decorations. Said, well, do it. Went away, came back a couple of days later, and there was Ken, putting up paper chains, weeping. And that has got to such a point where he now is on our website telling people about the change that happens as a result of just journeying with somebody. But our befriender needed to know the significance of the tiniest act in relationship so that change was possible. Brigitte works with with folk who are living on the streets. She's one of our outreach workers. And she says that she can tell when change is happening when the guys she's made appointments to meet stop just not turning up because life's too chaotic and start ringing her up and saying, look, I can't see you just now because something's happened, but can I see you tomorrow? They move from letting chaos run their lives to trying to just in the smallest of ways, meaning that taking some control over their own lives. Now, none of those would be targets or KPIs in a funding application. You know, the number of times the curtains shall be opened, you know. But those are the really profoundly human transformational times that we know will make the difference. Trusted relationships are the place where we will build society. Trusted relationships are persistent and patient and plan-free. Now, we've probably got more elections around just now than we really need. But there's an opportunity for us to begin to change the narrative about what it is we need to do to build a genuinely inclusive society so folk can go on that journey from exclusion to inclusion, the journey of the soul. So sure, we need to make sure that folk have the education opportunities they have and the houses they need and the money they need and the jobs and all those kinds of things. But what we really can do as voters, say to politicians, and I speak as an ex-politician, or as I like to say, a recovering politician, ask them not how many of this and how many of that and how much here and how much there, but how are you going to help all the services that we have, all the people we have who are in a position to journey with folk who are excluded? How are we going to help them build trusted relationships? How many trusted relationships are you going to enable? And if we are prepared to do that and talk differently about the way we want to see the journey from exclusion to inclusion, then the Darrells of this world will see and discover opportunities and have a chance to flourish. And we too will flourish as well, because this is a shared journey. And together, we will build a society where we are all loved, lovable, and feel that our love can be received. Thank you.